Guys, welcome back to another one. I'm going to make a quick intro here. Firstly, it was so funny. I uploaded my video. One of my first comments was like, "Oh, I came over thinking it was going to be live." Well, let me tell you something, guys. I tried to go live, and my laptop, the top of it, right above the keyboard, that shit got hot enough. I thought it was hot enough to boil water. Okay, I was like, "Yeah, this might not be a good idea." So, listen, baby steps, right? I accomplished getting monetized thanks to all of you. That was a process. Whew, but I got there, right? So I maybe have to wait a little bit till I can get a new computer that can handle running all the programs to go live. It is what it is. Listen, you do what you can do. So Halloween's coming, and a lot of people out here in the content world are doing scary stories to watching scary movies to um like ghost videos or whatever. And I've told all of you, if you weren't here, I'm a Christian. I'm proud of my faith. It has got me through some really tough times, and it is a comfort to me. And uh, so I think what's the scariest thing to me is, I believe in God. I also believe in hell. So I don't know if you're familiar with who Father Lampert is. He's actually an exorcist in Indianapolis. I've watched the majority of this man's podcast interviews, the one he did for Vice, all the way to the one he did for like Value Entertainment, the one he did the day before he did this one. I've watched him give speeches at St. Mary's, and I think listening to somebody that is of faith and talk about kind of their experiences in dealing with the darker side, of the devil, Satan, demons. I think that gives me chills more than any movie I could watch. So this woman, to me, of all the interviews I've watched, she asked probably some of the most interesting questions of him, and I had him dig kind of deep. Um, so I think this is what I'm going to do today. And there's other couple things that I have planned. Like there's another interview with an ex Satanist that gets into some things that he did. I'm like, oh, it gives me chills thinking about it. So we're going to listen to what his experiences is, what he thinks, and I hope you guys find this information interesting at the very least. So with that, we're going to continue on. This is, oh, by the way, shout out to this woman, um, Jedediah Billa Live. I hope I said that right. She did this 2 months ago with him, and I watched it right back then when it was first done. Cause I follow. Well, I'm country. I follow that old man. I follow Father Lampert pretty closely when he comes out with something new. He's just even though he's an exorcist, like he makes you feel calm. I don't know how, like I believe this man. Like he says it with the confidence of he's not trying to blow smoke up anybody's butt. He's that one guy that does the televised, oh yeah, and the people shaking all over the floor. Oh, please. I'm sorry, but that's where you start to lose me. Okay. Yeah, he'll get into it. You'll probably understand why I feel the way I do about him versus some of the more people that televise all this stuff. And then, you know, it is. Anyway. All right, here we go.
Corn. So first, let's tell the audience a little bit about Father Lampert. He is a Catholic priest. He is the designated exorcist of the Roman Catholic Archdiocese of Indianapolis, Indiana. He's also the author of a compelling book, Exorcism, The Battle Against Satan and His Demons, that came out in 2020.
Mm-hmm.
He received his exorcism classroom training in Rome, and he initially assisted on over 40 exorcisms with Father Carmine de Philippe. Am I saying that right?
Carmine de Philippis.
Okay, I'm Italian and I wrecked that. I'm never going to be able to go home for pasta marinara. It's over for me, but he is the mentor for exorcists in the Diocese of Rome. So assisted on a bunch of exorcisms before.
See, and I like her. There's something about her. I don't know, her charisma. I don't know, her personality. And again, I've watched a lot of his stuff. She asked really good questions.
He went into the rooms as the lead exorcist. So that is a little bit of your background, but I want to dig right into it with you here today. So how long was your training to learn how to do exorcisms?
I spent 3 months in Rome in the early part of 2006, from February through May. So that gave me the opportunity to learn firsthand the church's ministry to those who were up against the forces of evil and who were seeking the help of the church. At the time I was appointed in the United States, I became one of only 12 designated exorcists. So there was no one to train under in the United States. So my bishop sent me to Rome. It's interesting, in Italy, they have 300 designated exorcists
Wow.
throughout the country.
Why do you think that discrepancy exists between what exists in Italy, the number of exorcists, and here?
I think in Italy, they readily accept the possibility that what one is experiencing is due to spiritual causes, whereas perhaps the United States, we're quick to discount that. We think there's a scientific explanation for what everybody's dealing with.
What does that training look like? Classroom training on how to be an exorcist. Is it all in the classroom or is it hands-on? What does that look like?
It's all, what I experienced was all hands-on. So really it was being right there. It's kind of like the internist who's right there in the operating room and doing everything on your own. The church says the best way to become an exorcist is the apprenticeship model, so to work under a seasoned exorcist. It's easy to read what the church believes and teaches and to learn all of that, but the practical application is what really allows the exorcist to take on the identity.
Are you chosen to do that or do you pursue it? Like you're like, I want to be an exorcist, or did they choose you?
Chose me, so I've been a priest now 31 years. I was ordained in 1991, and I was appointed 14
Yeah, I don't think that's something you go, pick me, pick me.
years into my priesthood. And when one is ordained a priest in the Catholic Church, he promises obedience to his bishop and his successors. So the Archdiocese of Indianapolis has always had a stably appointed exorcist. So even when it fell out of practice in many dioceses after the Second Vatican Council, Indianapolis always had a priest in this position. Ironically, the priest who had the job was Monsignor John Ryan. He was pastor of the parish where I attended grade school.
Oh, really?
Never a dream one day
Wow.
that I was going to inherit one of his jobs. So when he passed away
Yeah.
in July of 2005,
Wow.
all the priests were trying to stay under the radar of the bishop, but somehow my name floated to the top.
Was there a part of you that was like, oh, no, or at any moment thought, maybe I'm not the right person for this? Any doubt at all?
I don't think there was any doubt, maybe a little bit of trepidation. Basically, what was I being asked to do? Even my bishop told me at the time he wasn't quite sure what he was asking me to do.
Do you know why they choose certain people? I mean, is that something that you would attribute to God ultimately makes that decision? Or is it a personality distinction where somebody they sense might be more adept at handling what that room may entail? What do you think?
The church says there's only really a couple of qualifications. The priest should be known for his holiness and piety. And the bishop told me that he selected me because he wanted a priest who believed in the reality of evil, but not a priest who would be too quick to believe that everyone who came to me was actually up against the forces of evil.
Meaning Daryl Brooks is not going to become your exorcist. He may need one, though.
So in his mind, he thought that I had a
Good head on your shoulders.
yes.
Yeah, it's true because you could have a bunch of people coming in that don't qualify. You have to make that determination as well. So you can't be quick to assume either to have that right personality balance. I was telling Tyler before the show, whatever personality you need to be able to go into a room and do an exorcism, I don't have it. It's the opposite of me because sitting here with you, you're already, I can sense, very calm, very composed. I'm like already like this, and it's just such a drastic distinction. Audience, just so you know, this is what it needs to look like if somebody wants to do it. They need to just be, I got this.
That's really the best mindset.
It's
Most
true.
people have images of like the movie The Exorcist where heads are spinning and pea soup is flying, but reality it's about praying.
Yeah, that's very, very true. We're going to talk about the movies in a little bit, and if you've seen anything that looks like the movies, how far away from reality all of those things look that we see in those movies we love so much. We'll get to that in a second, but just a few questions. How many exorcisms about have you performed?
Well, there are different levels of exorcism because the church says there's 4 different types of extraordinary demonic activity. There's demonic infestation, which is the presence of evil in a location or associated with an object. There can be demonic vexation, which are physical attacks that somebody's receiving. There can be bites and bruises and marks that appear on the skin. People might even remember the incisions of letters from movies they've watched that will pop up on the skin.
You've seen that? You've seen
Yeah.
letters just on
Yes.
appear on someone's skin. And how do you know that somebody didn't self-mutilate or that somebody didn't do that to them? How do you know that's a spirit?
Because they appear right in front of me. So it's not like they walk
You're
in.
sitting in front of someone and just letters appear on their skin.
Yes.
See, right then and there, I'd be like, I need a coffee break. I need something. Maybe not coffee, but something. Wow, that's
And then I was going to say, then there's demonic obsession, which are mental attacks, and then demonic possession, which is when the demon takes control of the person's body.
so. If we're talking about the actual demon taking control of a body, how many of those would you say you do in a year or overall? Just I need a ballpark number of how much exposure you'd have
Like,
to this.
like one a year.
One a year.
Yes.
Okay, so it's rare. Is it rare that people? We know that possession itself is rare, but is it rare?
See, and find that interesting that he says one a year. You know what I mean? Like he could capitalize on this to me if he wanted to. And so him being the most uh I don't know, opposed to doing it, like how the steps they have to go through to prove that something's wrong, gives a lot of credence to his credibility, in my opinion.
That people come to you and claim they're being possessed, or is that much more common? That filtration process. What does it look like?
Well, because I'm publicly known, there are many exorcists who prefer to remain anonymous. But when my bishop appointed me, he wanted me to go out and to help educate the faithful and even other people about what the church believes and teaches about exorcism. And because I'm publicly known, I probably receive a higher volume of inquiries. I currently average about 70 a week
70 inquiries a week.
from
A
people
week?
all over the United States and even other parts of the world who are seeking the help of the church.
And then you begin the filtration process of like who's really potentially possessed. How does that work then? Do you involve mental health professionals to kind of
Now, this is curious for people that don't know what the process is and making sure that he takes all the steps to approve them to even have an exorcism done. It's good. It's thorough. It's what you should do.
gauge this? Do you do it yourself? How do you decide which cases at that point of those 70 a week merit your attention in a spiritual way?
Well, as an exorcist, I cannot function outside of my diocese. So I can't function outside of the Archdiocese of Indianapolis because technically the bishop of the diocese is the exorcist. So I act in his name. For me to function outside of the Archdiocese of Indianapolis, I would need permission of the other local bishop. So if somebody contacts me from outside of Indianapolis, what I try to do is connect them with a priest or someone in their area. So I try to help them find a local connection. But for people who are local,
Yeah.
there is a process. So
What does that look like?
there's a protocol that we use in the United States. So step one of the protocol would be for the person to have a psychiatric evaluation. Sometimes people fight back on that. But the truth is, if somebody's really dealing with the demonic, they need to be in a good place mentally before going through the rite of the church. And then also there needs to be a physical examination by a medical doctor to rule out any physical cause. Third step of the protocol, I would meet with the person and do an intake questionnaire, trying.
And you wonder how many people actually know that he makes them go get a mental evaluation and a physical evaluation first. And I hope that the people that he refers them to, if he cannot practice outside of Indianapolis or whatever, are as thorough as he is and not nut jobs with their camcorder out saying, I'm going to be the next TikTok star. You know what I'm saying?
Trying to determine how did evil enter into this person's life. One might say that we want to isolate the presence of the demonic in the person so that we know how best to fight it. I would look for 4 signs of possibility of true demonic possession. There are 4 things. So it's the ability to speak and understand languages otherwise unknown to the individual, having superhuman strength beyond the normal capacity of the individual, having elevated perception, So the person is saying things that they should not otherwise know, which would lead me to know that that's a demon speaking and not that person as an individual. And then an aversion to anything of a sacred nature, such as being blessed with holy water, being shown a crucifix, having the Bible read in front of them, being in a church, you name it. Anything that's sacred that would cause a negative reaction could be the sign of a demonic presence. And then step 5 of the protocol is the most important. It's helped the person to resume the spiritual life or to find God for the very first time. Because as an exorcist, even though I'm a Catholic priest, more than half the people who contact me are not Catholic. So they come from other Christian faith traditions, other world religions, or no faith background whatsoever.
Now, and this is interesting because this is my problem, right? And this is just my opinion. And listen, it is what it is. God is a lot more forgiving than I am. But it does bother me that when people will turn their back on God or not have any faith at all and laugh at people that do, and then some kind of crap hits the fan, and then they're like, "Well, I'm praying. I'm praying. God didn't answer my prayer," and I'm like, "Well, excuse me. Wait a minute. You never talked to him, reached out to him, thanked him, prayed to him, nothing until you needed him. And now you're wondering why it might take a minute for him to get to your freaking phone call. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's like, wow. That's just personally. Now, again, God's very forgiving. If you ask Jesus to enter into your life, that's all you got to do is call, but like, still, I'm just like, really?
But it's not enough just to cast the demon out. It's very, very important that God has to be invited in. I've seen a growing trend today with faith is in decline in the lives of many people, that people who believe they're dealing with the demonic will now view the exorcist as a type of a magician. So people believe that I have special powers or abilities, or I have a few tricks up my sleeve that I can make all their problems go away. But ultimately, God is the one who's going to do that.
And can you explain to me that if you have no faith based, why would you call an exorcist to remove a demon or the devil if you don't believe in God? How does that work? How that's like trying to start a car without an engine.
And he will act through the church and through the church's ministers.
What's the youngest person you ever did an exorcism on?
4 years old.
4 years old.
Yes.
And
But
I'm
listen,
thinking of a child. I have a 2.5-year-old. You feel that you were able, in a small child, to be able to decide that was, I don't know if it was demonic possession in that case, but that it wasn't something that was just personality driven, that it wasn't something odd going on at home. Was it very clear in a child that small that it was important for you to step in and for that to be a spiritual, religious intervention?
Yeah, anyone under the age of reason, which is the age of 7, according to the Catholic Church, cannot invite evil on themselves. So somebody that has authority over the child bears responsibility for that. So in this particular case, it was the parents who were involved in all kinds of occult activities and, satanic rituals and whatnot that exposed their children to the demonic, which ended up in a demonic possession of this young girl.
Were you able to successfully get rid of?
like somebody cooking up meth in their house and then they blow up their home with their kids inside. Like, oh, I didn't mean to hurt my child.
Whatever was going on there, Satan, demons. I'm going to ask you specifics about that too, because I think there's a lot of confusion about who takes over the body. But
Demons are always cast out if people truly want that.
Okay.
Because sometimes people will just tell me so much, but they won't tell me the full details.
Okay.
So people also have to make a change. So like these parents needed to change the things that they were doing, their practices. And my experience is that sometimes these practices become so entrenched in people's lives that it's hard to walk away from it. But hopefully it's the love of their children that will motivate them to make the change in their life.
So what is the Catholic Church's teaching on exorcism and possession? What is their message that, first of all, I'm assuming this is real, this is possible, but what do they want the world to know when you have so many skeptics out there when it comes to this topic? What's their message?
The church's message is that evil is personified in what we call the devil and the other fallen angels, which are the demons. So evil is not just something of our own making. It's not just humanity's inhumane treatment of one another, but it is personified. But even though evil is a reality in what we call the devil and his demons, it doesn't mean that the devil is the cause of all evil, because sometimes evil is something of our own making when we misuse our free will, which hurts other people.
What makes
And I hope everybody heard that part, like, really, because it's not always like what he's trying to say is it's not always like possession or something. Some people just are just evil people themselves or selfish, or you know what I mean? And he said it best.
certain people, you mentioned, that child whose parents were involved in, I'm not sure what they were doing, cultist type stuff, evil satanic stuff. What makes certain people vulnerable to possession versus others? Is it about faith? Is it about mental weakness? What is it?
The key ingredient is faith. Perfect faith will cast out fear. But again, there's that growing trend where people are moving away from faith. And when people move away from God, then I would suggest that the devil tries
Yeah,
to
and
creep
let me
in.
show you something real quick.
Because ultimately,
I'm going to show y'all something that I ran across a couple months ago, I think it was. Just hang on. I'm going to show you this. This game, is geared towards children, just in the way that it's made. Look at the first off. Look at the name of it. Look at the name. Then I'm going to turn the audio off. But look at this game. This is a lamb with its hands tied behind its back, being led into the center of a pentagram, upside down, by the way. Having it look. Look at it. This is a game. Now you tell me something ain't going on. You tell me what time whenever it was that we got to the part to where this was cool, and then people that try to mock you and say, "Oh, it's all satanic panic," and all these people are just, look at them, look what they're doing, bowing down to that big, what would you call it? Moloch is what I would say it looks like. And then look at this upside down crosses, and he says, "Did you see this? Those are upside down crosses in his eyes. Tell me they ain't. Tell me they ain't. Tell me I'm crazy. Look at them all of them. Look at this. This is a video game. Okay? Tell me I'm crazy.
the average person, if we're spiritual and we're living out our faith, if one is, a Catholic, for example, if you're going to Mass, you're praying, you're receiving the sacraments, you're reading the Bible, the devil's already on the run. We don't have to do anything extraordinary to defeat the devil. It's the ordinary aspects of our faith.
Does that go for people who are of a different faith as well? Or is it just Catholic faith that would provide a protective measure against possession?
It would be any faith, because the Catholic Church doesn't have a monopoly on the practice of exorcism. There's a lot of faith-filled people out there. So even if somebody contacts me who's not Catholic, my goal is not to convert them, but to reconnect them with whatever faith tradition they have. Because the common
I
denominator
like
is,
him. He's like, it's not my job to convert them, it's to reconnect them with whatever faith base that they have. That's a genuine Christian. And I cannot tell you how many people I have met in my time on the online world that have turned their back on God because they have went to a church and met some kind of the parishioners or the pastor or the deacon or whatever. And when they had questions and asked them questions, they were treated poorly. They were almost like looked down their nose at because they were been questioning. And you should never be treated that way. If you are, walk out and go find another one. And I'm serious. Walk out and go find another one. Anybody, any faith should not live in fear of being questioned. should never be concerned about somebody coming to them and asking them questions about, okay, what about this? Or can you tell me where I can read this? Or, I it bothers me the amount of people that have told me that they were ran off by a church because of how they were treated. Go find another one. If you're really seeking, you should be accepted in your journey. It's your journey to take.
Is that these folks have walked away from their faith. So ideally, I would like to work with whatever faith leader they have, because it's not possible. I mean, I can pray with or for anyone, but I can't take everybody under my wing for the next few years.
Right.
So I can pray with them, but then I want to connect them with the community. A common denominator when people deal with the demonic is that they're in isolation. And when you think about faith, it's about being in a community. Even the word church comes from the Greek word ekklesia, which means community. It's the notion there's safety in numbers. But when we become isolated, we become more vulnerable to accepting the lies of the devil, and then we kind of enter into darkness. So my goal in an exorcism is to help bring people back into the light of God.
Did you see, on that note of isolation, we just went through 2 years where people were very oddly isolated in ways they hadn't been before with COVID and some of the restrictions. Did you see an uptick in people seeking help from you at that time?
Yes. So I mentioned I get 70 inquiries a week. Prior to COVID, it was 40 a week. So it went up 30 a week just from people dealing with isolation due to COVID.
Okay, that's interesting. All right, I want to get to the
Think about what he's saying there. The inquiries, the people reaching out almost doubled during the lockdowns, doubled.
exorcisms themselves and what happens in the room. So if you can walk us through this, what do you bring into the room?
So before I do an exorcism, so I've gone through those protocols, I've determined that somebody truly is dealing with the demonic. I'm trained to be a skeptic, so I need to reach moral certitude, meaning beyond a doubt this is actually demonic. It's not a mental health issue. It's not a physical condition. So once I've reached that, then I will make the determination where the exorcism will take place. So the devil doesn't get to decide. People watch movies, and I always jokingly say an exorcism is never performed in an abandoned house on a dead-end street at midnight during a thunderstorm.
I always think of the bedroom of the little girl in The Exorcist. Like, does it have to be a sacred space, or can it be someone's home or their room? Or
I would only do one in a sacred space.
okay.
So like in those movies, because again, I want to bring the demonic onto the turf of God rather than on their turf.
Okay.
And then
Think about that. That's interesting. That makes sense, though. Of course, the people in movies going to do stuff theatrically and all that other stuff, but that's how it should be. You should never fight the devil in his yard.
and I will prepare myself as a priest. I will celebrate Mass. I go to confession. I determine who will be present. So obviously the person who's afflicted, I require them to bring a family member or a friend, and then I have other people in the room that are there to pray.
How many people do you bring in usually?
So total, there might be about 5 or 6 people in the church or chapel during an exorcism.
Are you ever worried about those people losing it or getting overwhelmed or compromising what goes
She asked really good questions.
on in that room? Because I'm sure it can escalate to all sorts of wild things.
Yeah, there's no such thing as exorcism tourism.
Yeah.
So no one's there out of a sense of curiosity. So these are people that I know are
Trained.
well grounded in their faith. Because when the demonic manifests, what the demon does, looking through the eyes of the possessed, is to determine who the weakest link in the room is.
Right.
And then go after that as a way to disrupt the prayer of the church. So actually, nobody would want to be there if they weren't properly prepared.
So how have you seen a demon manifest? You look at movies like The Exorcist and you see, her eyes change, her skin changes, the temperature in the room often gets either extremely cold or extremely hot. She levitates. Her voice gets very odd. She does speak in other languages. What have you personally witnessed in terms of manifestation of demons?
I've witnessed all those things.
You've seen someone levitate.
I've seen someone levitate during an exorcism, eyes rolled in the back of the head, foaming at the mouth, growling and snarling. The reason the voice gets deeper is that it's kind of like a wild dog that's barking. It's meant to instill fear. You know, the notion is the louder you are, then maybe you're trying to prove that you're greater than you really are. Mm-hmm. Stenches in the room. No, I always say that when a demon manifests, a stench is about 100 times worse than the raccoon that's been hit on the side of the road that's been baking in the sun for the last 10 days. So it's really things that are just really putrid in nature. And the reason for all the manifestations and the distortion of the human body is that the human person is created in the image and likeness of God. And the devil believes that by distorting the image of the person who's possessed, that in an indirect way, he's distorting the image of God.
One thing that you see in that movie is that I'm trying to remember. I was gonna rewatch The Exorcist in preparation, but my husband is a big chicken and wouldn't watch it with me. Tyler, I have to call out Jeremy. You know that. So I did not. So I'm trying to think back. I've seen it a bunch of times. I love the movie. First of all, to me, if you're a skeptic, there has to be a line here, right? I mean, if someone is levitating, that is not going to be a sign of mental illness. So I'm always like, how do you not at that point acknowledge that something beyond just mental illness is happening? I mean, maybe you could account for growling and other things, but levitation, I can't conceive of how you would witness that and not immediately say, okay, this is beyond just a trip to a psychologist today. Do you have people who
I mean, unless you're at a David Copperfield show.
doubt even at that point? Like, oh, you saw someone levitate, Father? Oh no, that's just I don't know, some sort of muscular condition. Or is that what they say, the skeptics?
I think so. Yeah, they don't want to believe it, because if one believes it, it requires one to make a change in their life. You have to reevaluate what it is that you believe and think. And if one can reject the reality of evil, then one can reject God.
Mm-hmm. Now, one thing that you see in those films as well, in that one in particular, I'm speaking about the film, when was that made? Tyler, can you check for me the original Exorcist, just so we know for the audience what we're referencing? One thing that does happen is the demon bounces into the priest in that film, and he winds up dying as a result of it. He senses that, and I believe, if I'm remembering it correctly, he tosses himself out a window because he doesn't want to be, I guess, a conduit for evil in any way. Are you ever worried that in that room you could be compromised by the demon?
Mm-mm.
That cannot happen if the priest is following the necessary steps. That's why I say there's no such thing as an emergency exorcism. If the priest doesn't follow what the church has laid out, that's when one gets himself into trouble.
What if you were to follow what the church laid out, though? And I apologize for interrupting, but what if internally you didn't have the sound faith everybody thinks that you did? Let's say, for example, and a priest walks into a room. Could that happen? Could that happen to a priest who maybe was struggling with doubt, and people didn't know it?
Absolutely. Because that's where the demon would attack. He would try to enter through that form of doubt as an entry point. And that's why it's so important, again, to make sure that the priest has really prepared himself properly, as well as everyone else in the room.
So help me understand.
And I will tell you, I think it's very smart that the Roman Catholic Church allowed Father Lampert to go out and have these conversations with the public, because you just don't see this very often. And I think that, just and then this is my opinion, I think that it probably has a lot to do with people losing their faith or being distracted by, materialistic things, like even here, like making it on YouTube or becoming a TikTok star or whatever, and forgetting about God. And I think that he's a good reminder that there is a constant battle going on, and don't you ever forget it. And if anyone is listening to this out there in your life, my only advice to you is sit down and reevaluate. Think about your challenges and all I can say is like I get such a comfort in my relationship with God. And it does not belong to a building. It does not belong to a preacher. It does not belong to my friends or my family. Nobody can take that away from me. That's why, again, it bothers me to hear people say that members of the church or something did something to destroy their faith, because mine doesn't rest there. And I hope that people can get to that point as well. Like when I talk about God, I become immediately like teary eyed. It's that deep for me. So I just find it I don't know. I get I just hope that people kind of just put some thought into it, hopefully.
And for people who aren't Catholic, is it Satan? Is it a multitude of demons? Do they all answer to Satan? Like, what is going on in the world of like, how do people understand? Are there degrees of different? For example, if a higher level demon possesses you, are your manifestations more extreme? How does it all work?
So the church would identify 9 choirs of angels. So there are 9 rankings of angels. And when they fell from all 9 choirs.
This is
So there, just as much as there is a hierarchy of the angelic choir, there is a hierarchy in the demonic world. So the chief of the demons is Satan. Prior to the fall, he was Lucifer, the highest of all the angels, closest to the throne of God. But then when he rebelled against God, his choice to rebel, we could say, reverberated through all 9 choirs.
And do you know what lesson I learned there is it kind of reflects here on earth? It's like Lucifer was the closest to God. He was the leader of all the angels, and it still wasn't enough. It still wasn't enough. He demanded to become God, to dethrone God, because no matter that he was God's right hand, no matter of the position he held in heaven, it still wasn't enough. And I see that reverberate all over this earth in people that become so successful, but it's still not enough. They want more and more and more. And the same people that will sit on these channels and talk to you about how the wealthy should be given more, and talk about income inequality, and these are the very people that will go out and buy multi-million-dollar homes and lease $200,000 cars, telling you that other people should be doing more when they themselves that are ridiculing others are not doing it themselves. I mean, listen, I barely have a pot to piss in and a window to throw it out of, but I guarantee you, if I see someone in need and I have $5 in my wallet, I will give it to them. I'll figure it out. I've done it my whole life. But that's what doing something for somebody else is. It's not about whether it's $10,000 or $10. It's that you try to do the right thing in that moment. So I don't mean, well, no, I'm not doing that either. Used to do that all the time, and I'd be like, apologize. Well, I'm not trying to be preachy, and I'm not trying. And that makes me sick too. All the Christians now that apologize for being Christians. I refuse to. I'm not apologizing for my relationship with God, for nobody.
Choirs, and then 1/3 of the angels embraced his rejection of God. The book of Revelation speaks about how his tail swept 1/3 of the stars out of the sky, and the stars are the reference to the angels, and then they were cast down to earth. It's interesting to note that they were cast out of heaven, but they weren't cast out of creation. They still have a role to play in God's plan for humanity.
When you're in these rooms, are you ever afraid at all? Are there moments where you're like, I don't know if I've got this? Really? I mean levitation. I'm guessing that things happen sometimes that surprise you. Do you ever feel fear?
I would say early on in the ministry, after coming back from Rome and doing exorcisms on my own and meeting with people, I realized I didn't have my backup in Father Carmine. It was
Right.
it's just
Just
me.
you.
It's just me. And so I remember the first person I met with who was trying to tell me why they were possessed. And I listened to the story. And then before I left, the husband says to me, well, would you pray with us before you leave? And when I did, his wife, who believed that she was possessed, lunged at me like a wild dog. Now, of course, I jumped back 5 feet, I think, in one fell swoop. My heart is racing a mile a minute. But then I immediately just walked right back up towards her. And I think my hands were shaking like a leaf, and then laid my hands on her and then began saying a prayer. I didn't do an exorcism at that time. But I would say that over the years, yeah, I'm not afraid of any of this stuff. So if you've become, tough after watching all these horror movies over the
Yeah.
years,
Yeah, I mean, although I'm not in the room. So, I mean, do you have a backup? Like, is there somebody there in case of anything with you? If anything goes wrong, is there a backup priest in the room? It's just you.
it's just me.
Wow.
But because I'm relying on the power and the authority of Christ, because I would say that in an exorcism, Jesus is the main actor. He's not the bystander.
So explain that to people who aren't religious. Do you see yourself as a conduit for God, for the Holy Spirit? And do you feel that? Can you feel a sense of something greater than you in the room when you're performing these exorcisms?
Absolutely. So the Catholic understanding of the sacrament of holy orders when a man becomes a priest is that he acts in persona Christi, the Latin phrase. He acts in the person of Christ. And so doing an exorcism, I would be acting in the person of Christ. If I were caught up in my own sinfulness, then I would be acting in my own name. And I would get myself in trouble, as you alluded to earlier, because the devil knows who's trying to work to defeat him. And as long as I have the power and the authority of Christ behind me, I'll stand firm. But once I move away from that is when the house begins to crumble.
Do you ever worry about the demon? We talked about, a demon potentially leaping into a priest. What about a family member? What about someone who's not as well trained as you? Is that a concern ever that they could target or play mind games with a family member in the room?
The
They can try to do that, certainly. Again, that goes back to the importance of everyone that's present will have prepared themselves too. And again, if all the necessary safeguards are taken, that's really not something to be concerned about. Because even when an exorcism begins, the priest will say a prayer over everyone in the room, asking for God's protection.
You've said, I saw in an interview, that the exorcist, I'm going to quote you, should not focus on the manifestations of evil, but focus on the power of God that is at work. That sounds great. How does that translate? Does that mean that when a demon is manifesting, you're kind of ignoring the antics and just going about the prayer? And that's got to be really challenging in the moment
she asks great questions. She's a great interviewer.
to not like,
Make
what?
sure you go subscribe to this lady for sure. Hopefully she doesn't ding me. I really don't do this where I just literally play somebody else's interview. But like it just I'm not gonna get a hold of this guy anytime soon. And this to me, when asked about doing Halloween stuff, this to me is what came to mind.
Whoa, there's somebody in the air. I can't imagine that. But explain to people what that means a little bit about not focusing on what the devil is doing and staying really like laser focused on your role.
A good analogy would be a parent with their child, and the child is throwing a temper tantrum, but the parent doesn't feed into it. Lets the child have the temper tantrum, but doesn't react, because just as much as the child having the temper tantrum wants a reaction, the demon, through these manifestations, wants a reaction. So I've learned over the years, I just don't feed into it. So a good example I'll give, so we mentioned levitation earlier. So in one of the exorcisms in Rome, 17 years ago when I was there, the person began to levitate. And as I'm looking at this in disbelief, I was more impressed by Father Carmine. So as the person begins to levitate, he's looking out of the corner of his eye as he's praying. He never stops praying, but he reaches over and puts his hand on the head of the person and pushes them back down into the chair. So he never once.
Could you imagine if you looked over and somebody was raising up like that? You just put your hand over there and be like, sit down, Billy, sit down. Oh, well, I'd be out of that room. I would be out in the daggum driveway. I'd be flagging down the first car that drives by and be like, I don't care where you're going. Just let me go with you.
Paused in the prayer of the church. And what I learned from that lesson was kind of the mentality, really, is that all you got? Because I'm not impressed.
Right. Right. So then you would have to walk into that room with the belief, you would have to actually walk through life with the belief that no demon or no presence of evil would be too powerful for God to handle.
Absolutely. Because, the demons are still creatures. They're more powerful than humans, but they're still creatures. And no creature can be greater than the Creator, God Himself.
Have you encountered people faking possession or trying to convince you they're possessed and something just doesn't look right? Is there a test that you administer? Like, do you use fake holy water and throw it at them and they're like, and you're like, okay, this is not a real, like, how do you assess that other than just, you talked about the psych evaluation and you talked about a medical examination, but how do you assess that if it's a fake or not?
So I do some of the things you suggested. Sometimes I sprinkle people with water that's not been blessed, so it's not holy water. So I know whether or not it's been blessed. The demon will know because of the sacred character, but the person as an individual will not. So again, I do these things to get back to that moral certitude beyond a doubt this person truly is possessed. And I've had people that has tried to fake it, some deliberately, meaning they're trying to make a mockery of the church.
Right.
Some people do it indirectly just because they're dealing with maybe some mental health issues. I remember there was a priest back in my diocese, and I went to his parish, and he wanted me to evaluate somebody that the mother brought in about this young boy. And during our conversation, the boy started rolling all over the floor and whatnot. And then the priest says to me, well, obviously this person's possessed. I'm like, no, that person is not possessed. And then I went back probably about a year later for another person. And then during the conversation, there was a little, not much. And he says to me, well, that person's not possessed. I said, no, that person is possessed. So some of that is just wisdom that comes with time. And even before I meet with somebody, I will spend time in prayer just asking God to guide and direct me in the best way to help this person and to know whether or not this is truly something demonic.
I'm going to do one more question before we head to the chat, and then I have more after that. So Tyler, just if you can check that out. Does possession always manifest in what we see in the movies? Or is it possible that possession could manifest in just evil? For example, and I think Pat brought this up to you yesterday in your interview, asked a question related to, why don't you see big athletes or big, people well known that are undergoing possession? Is it possible, though, that possession could take a form of maybe your eyes don't go green, you don't levitate, but you behave in a way that is evil, unpleasant, damaging to others? Could a random person who commits murder be possessed but not manifesting in a way that would make for a great movie? How do you feel about that broader definition of possession?
Yes.
I would say that manifestations indicate that there's an internal struggle taking place. So the person is dealing with the demonic, but they don't want it. They want to reject it. And that's what causes the manifestations. It could be that somebody is dealing with the demonic, but there is no internal struggle. And because of that, there would be no manifestations. The church would even say there's something that we would call perfect possession, where the individual has united their will with the will of the demon. I mean, obviously the goal in the spiritual life and the life of faith would be to unite our wills with the will of God. But there are people that would unite their wills with the will of the devil. And when that happens, there would be no internal struggle, so there would be no need for manifestations.
Okay. All right. We're going to check in with the chat and see what Tyler has for us right now.
We got
How's
some
it
good
going?
ones.
Some
We got
good
some
ones.
good ones.
Okay. Here you go.
Did you ever have an instance where a demon revealed something that it was compelled to answer in the name of Jesus?
Absolutely, because one of the goals during an exorcism is to get the demon to admit the truth about the faith that the demons have rejected. And one of the ways to do that is to get them to acknowledge, for example, to say that the Blessed Mother is the Queen of Heaven. They know the truth. They don't want to say these things, but they're compelled to say them.
Do you find that interesting that they are compelled and they do answer these things, that they can't stand up against it and they can't force themselves not to answer?
Yeah, they don't really want to answer, but they're compelled because demons are really infuriated that they're being interrogated, if you will, by a human person that they believe is inferior to themselves.
Right.
And because of that, they reach the point where they'll spout things out kind of as a way of saying, I know more than you know, or you're inferior to me.
Have you ever had it, before we get to more questions from the chat, have you ever had a demon get personal with you? One of the things I remember from the movie is that the demon kind of takes on the persona of the priest's mom in order to elicit a certain response from him. Have you ever had anyone get personal with you about your life or your emotions where you kind of had to do a reality check in that moment of, okay, let me just not be affected by any of this?
I would say no, I've not
No.
had that experience. And again, it's because before I would go into an exorcism, that's the notion of going to confession, just turning everything over to God.
Okay. Tyler?
There's a lot of good ones here, actually. So, if evil spirits are forced from the body, well, so this is a two-part question. First, can you describe an exorcism that went poorly or did not work? But follow up on that. If it is successful and they are forced from the body, where do they go? If they've existed since the beginning of time, it doesn't seem like they can be destroyed permanently.
Every exorcism session provides some benefit, even if that moment it doesn't provide total deliverance for the person who's possessed. So during every session, the demons are weakened on some level. And then when the moment, because ultimately God will determine the moment of expulsion, if you will. And then the question of where do they go? They're not destroyed at that point, because we know that when the angels fell, they were cast down to the earth, where God permits them to roam until the final judgment at the end of time. So one can say that in an exorcism, what really happens is that the connection between this individual and the demon is broken. But again, that goes back to the importance of the person then connecting with God. There's a passage in Scripture in chapter 11 of Luke's Gospel where it says, once the demon has been cast out, it goes and wanders through the arid wasteland, and then coming back and finding the house swept clean, it goes and finds 7 other demons worse than itself, and they take up residence in the person. So it's not enough for a person to want to be free of the demon. The person also has to want to grow in holiness and virtue. And over the years, there are people that I have chosen not to work with who I believe were dealing with the demonic, but I chose not to work with them out of a sense of charity, because as horrible as things were for them at that time, I realized it could become 7-fold worse if they weren't willing to grow in holiness and virtue.
Have you ever had, on that question that Tyler got, have you ever had an experience where it just wasn't working? You went for multiple sessions, it wasn't working. And what do you do at that point? Do you transfer? Do you bring someone else in? What do you do?
Just keep working. So I worked with somebody for 1 year.
1 year.
We met about every 3 to 5 weeks, depending. And there were 7 demons that named themselves in this individual. So when someone's possessed, usually there's a cluster of demons. It's never just one demon. It's interesting, if you read the gospel accounts of Jesus casting out demons, they always go from speaking in the singular to the plural. I know who you are, the Holy One of God. Have you come against us before the proper time? So there's always usually more than one. And that goes back to the notion, again, there is a hierarchy in the demonic world. In my experience in working with this person for a year, the 6 weakest demons were the first to go. And then there was one more dominant demon who told me its name was Leviathan, so I commanded it to tell me its name, because when the name of a demon is known, then it's showing weakness, because when you know a person's name, you have a certain power and control over them. And Leviathan is a demon mentioned in the Bible. It's the great sea monster. And the demon told me it did not have to leave because it had been invited in. And since it had been invited in, it was making a claim on the life of this person. But we could say that in an exorcism, the demon is commanded to return that which it has stolen, namely a person created in image and likeness of God, because ultimately all human life belongs to God.
Does that person get better after each session, though, or do those internal demons rally, and do they get worse to kind of protect themselves from what you're doing?
I would say they get better each time.
Okay.
Because they're weakening, and then they just reach the point. So in this particular one, I've shared this story before, because I was in an old convent chapel in southern Indiana. The demon is manifesting, yelling and screaming and blaspheming, and then a bell rings. 400 school children are now pouring out onto the parking lot to go home after school, right outside the window.
Gosh.
And the demon begins to scream and laugh hysterically. And the demon says to me, if you stop praying, I'll stop screaming. But if you keep praying, I'm going to keep screaming. People will come in here to see what you're doing, and then you're going to have to stop anyway. And then I told the demon to obey me in all things, although an unworthy minister of Christ. And then I told it to say the words that the archangel Gabriel used to greet the Blessed Mother in chapter 1 of Luke's Gospel. Told the demon to say, Hail Mary, full of grace, and then to leave. And then the demon looked at me and laughed and goes, Grace of full, kind of scrambled the words around. And then I commanded it to say the words in the proper order, and then to leave immediately. And then this demon that had been screaming and whatnot, speaking in a very deep voice, in a child's voice said, Hail Mary, full of grace. And there was a shriek, and the woman began to glow. So the demon was gone. When I think of the glow, I think of, most people have seen the picture of a saint with a halo around their head.
Yeah.
But they're not radiating their glory, they're radiating the glory of God. And one of the things that I've witnessed in exorcisms when demons are expelled is that the person literally begins to glow.
Wow. You told that story just a moment ago about someone you had worked with for a year that was manifesting X amount of demons. I don't know if you said 7. How do you know, play the skeptic for a moment, how do you know that's not someone, in that case, how did you know that wasn't someone with multiple personality disorder?
Because they had already gone through the required psychological evaluation, and they were actually continuing to see a psychiatrist as they were going through the ritual of exorcism.
So the psychiatrists you're working with in those capacities will come to you, and they themselves will acknowledge that this is outside their realm.
Yeah, and I don't necessarily look for psychologists or psychiatrists who agree with me.
Right, that's what I'm saying. Like, so because the challenge here, the challenges we get, people who have faith or people who are inclined to believe this is, well, the science says differently, right? So what I'm trying to get at is, if you have a team of people who aren't staffed to agree with you, they are coming to you in their scientific realm and saying, we did our analysis, this is outside our realm, this is your turf. They're admitting that.
Yes.
Okay.
That's what I look for.
So that's a little food for the skeptics. I don't know if you have anything else right now that... then I'm going to go on.
There's an interesting debate going on. This wasn't specifically directed at you, but I think you could speak to it. How can one be so confident in their religious beliefs when there are so many religions claiming that they are the right way? And people are saying, I'm skeptical of people that follow certain religions to a T, that there's a certain bit of every religion that does have some truth and veracity to it. And one thing I personally find very interesting is, the translation of Israel, the Jewish people, is to wrestle with God. I've always found that deeply interesting, wherein you might contend that one doesn't follow that religion to a T, or doesn't follow God to a T. Perhaps they follow the Torah to a T, the Bible to a T. So if you could expand on that a little bit and explain how you are so confident in your beliefs, specifically in the Catholic faith.
I think what you just mentioned is true. There are elements of truth in all religions, because I think when somebody chooses to be religious, they're searching for divine truth. They're looking for ultimate meaning and purpose to human existence. Why am I here? What's human life really all about? And again, as a Catholic, that's where I find myself grounded. If somebody's Jewish, that's where they find themselves grounded. Whether they belong to another Christian faith tradition, that's wherever they find themselves grounded. But again, I think ultimately for a person of faith, one is choosing to put God at the center of their life. We might even say that sin kind of pushes God off center. And then the goal would be just to acknowledge our own sinfulness and put God back on center. That doesn't necessarily mean that we're always going to be perfect. But again, it means that God has his rightful place to play in my life. And I think when I think about the world of the demonic, the devil ultimately wants to destroy belief in God. Yesterday, during the conversation that I had, there was a reference to the 17th century French poet Pierre Baudelaire that says that the devil's cleverest ruse is to convince everybody that he doesn't exist. And I would go on to add to that, another part of that ruse would be to convince people that God doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm. I think what a lot of people struggle with, and I can even relate to this in many ways, is that there are people out there who believe in God. What they struggle with is really the role of priests, of nuns, of people who feel they are this passageway. For example, you can walk into a room, get training, and do an exorcism, and they struggle with that because they say, well, this is just a person. This is just another person like me. And what do you say to people who doubt organized religion because they doubt the ability of regular people to be passageways for God, the Holy Spirit? What do you say to them about why they should believe that you are capable of channeling God in that way?
I would respond by saying that everyone has a vocation, and the word vocation means a calling from God. That God has a plan for all of us. And as a priest, again, it's not what I'm doing. Again, if people are relying on me, we're in trouble. But again, priests, religious sisters, you think of pastors, rabbis, imams, anyone who's dedicating their life to God, we could say that they're, I'm not dragging people to heaven, but one can act as a conduit. One can allow their life to be used by God as a way to bring others to God. Because ultimately, we're all on the same journey together. It's not at the end of the day we get to look at each other and laugh and say, ha ha ha, I got a bigger piece of God than you do. So I don't believe that we're in a sense of competition. I think we're all on a search for ultimate meaning and purpose, truth, if you will. And ultimately, that's found in God. And I think anyone who dedicates their life to God is just out there as a way to remind people that God does have his rightful place to play in the course of human history.
How do you feel about, when it comes to the exorcisms, regular people trying to do what you do? Can, for example, even in a broader sense, someone like me, for example, right, say I'm Catholic, I get holy water that's been blessed, and now can I utilize that holy water to bless someone else? Like, what are the limitations of what a regular person can do in this hemisphere of exorcisms, of blessing someone, of being that conduit?
My first response goes to a line in Scripture where the disciples return and they say, Lord, we saw someone casting out demons, in your name, and we tried to stop them because they're not in our company. And Jesus said, well, don't stop them, because anyone who's not against us is for us.
Okay.
So I do believe, I mean, many of the saints of the church, St. Catherine of Siena used to do exorcisms, not by any formula, but simply walking down the street because of her holiness and virtue. Demons couldn't even stand to be in her presence. But the rite of exorcism is a liturgical rite. So there is a prescribed way for it to be done. But people can be delivered by other means because, again, ultimately, Jesus is the exorcist.
Right.
And he can work where he chooses. But again, as a liturgical rite of the church, there is a ritualized way that the Catholic Church performs exorcisms.
I like that. Jesus can work where he chooses. I'm going to put that on a sticker. Put that in my room. I like that. So I want to get to some comments by skeptics and so-called scientists. We've learned the science can get a little distorted these last 2 years, so one never knows who calls himself a scientist these days. Tyler, we'll get back to you at the end, too, with some more from the chat. So please, people in the chat, first of all, don't forget.
And remember, he just said that it was a woman that could literally was so holy that demons couldn't even stand to be around her. She exorcised people without even trying, just by walking near them. And two, Jesus can work wherever he chooses to. That's what you want to hear a priest say. Like somebody that does not take themselves as the all powerful one or the special person. Like he gives all glory to God. That humbleness is what you look for.
Subscribe. We're bringing you these conversations. We need your support. Please hit your like button if you like what we're doing here today. And also,
By the way, I did. There's my like. There's my subscribe. But yeah, she does a great job. She's done a great job with this.
please continue to send your messages, your questions in the chat. We're going to check back again toward the end of the show. Father, I want to address some of the criticism by skeptics, and we're going to go through a few. One I've heard is that these individuals are not speaking in tongues. They will say, oh, we've had these recordings analyzed and linguists have looked at them, and it's actually just a bunch of babble. Your response?
So there's a difference between speaking in tongues, which is called glossolalia. It's a gift of the Holy Spirit. And then people that are possessed who are speaking a language. So speaking a language would be a defined language, one that we know, even if it's one that's fallen out of practical use. Ancient Greek, Latin, for example, if one is speaking Aramaic. Mm-hmm. But again, it would be a language that would be identifiable at some point in human history.
But you would have verification that that was in fact a language being spoken and not babble made to sound like a language.
And I wouldn't just require just that one
Right.
proof, if you will, or symptom, whatever it might be. So I would still look for other things.
For others. But on that point, you feel comfortable saying that it's not just babble that you've witnessed.
And that's the notion of an angelic nature. Mm-hmm. So why can a demon speak a language that the person as an individual doesn't know? Mm-hmm. And it goes back to St. Thomas.
Yeah, and the next one again I'm going to do is an ex-Satanist that left and became, turned his life over to God. His story is, I saw his several years ago before I even knew who Father Lampert was, and that's the one I'll do next. I mean, you're listening and hearing it from people that experienced it, that's talking about their lives and things that they did, and people that I genuinely believe are speaking from their heart, and they're not out here trying to get rich or, I mean, it is, I don't, this is what I feel like. It's Halloween, and so this is the path that I'm taking to show you what scares me. Okay. Like I love horror films. Okay. My favorite horror film of all time is the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre. My parents took me to the drive-in to see that movie when I was a kid. I mean, literally, like I think I was like 7 or 8 years old or something like that. I remember my dad taking me and my sister, and we had an old Citation, and like I remember like he had to hook the speakers on the window Now you can go to the drive-in. There's a drive-in 30 minutes from my house. I love it. It's cool as I'll get out. But you just turn your radio station to it and it plays in through your speakers of your car, which is amazing. But back then you hooked the speakers to your window. Okay. And so yep, the old time where you hooked the tray to your window. Yep, back then. But yes, those are scary movies, and they're scripted, there's cameras, and there's actors. This to me is reality. So constantly making sure that I try and live my life the best that I can. I'm not perfect at it. The last thing I'd want to do is open myself up and crack a door for evil to enter in, for Satan to grab a foothold, and to attempt to even throw down one root.
Thomas Aquinas, who said that when God created the angelic world, he gave them infused knowledge. They didn't have to learn anything. They was like downloaded.
Right.
So, and they still maintain that attribute even after the fall.
When it comes to the contorted body postures, the twisting, skeptics will say it's just imitation. They're faking it, they're imitating, they're role playing. What have you seen that you would be able to say, no, that's not imitation, decisively?
Yeah, bodily distortions would be things like the arching of the back or the body moving in positions that are really not possible for the human person. And again, this would be an individual that I would have known fairly well, going through the process of interviewing them, getting to know more about them. Mm-hmm. So it isn't like they walk in the door and I begin an exorcism. So I will know things about them ahead of time. That goes back to the same way with the use of language. I'm going to know whether or not they know how to speak, ancient Latin, for example. Mm-hmm. But like bodily contortions.
Can it be something as extreme as like head spinning completely 360 degrees around? In other words, something like that, you couldn't as a human do that and survive. I couldn't make that happen. Is it that extreme?
It is. And here's a good example. The doubters might really like this one too, but during an exorcism, I saw when the demon manifested, the person's jaw dropped and moved off to the side.
All the way down off to the side, in a way that would not be humanly possible to do.
No, that's not possible for a human to do that.
Wow. Do you have any other examples of things that you've seen in the room that to skeptics would be beyond capacity for a mentally ill person, for example, so that there would be no confusion? Anything else other than, you mentioned the levitating, obviously, anything else that you would want to share that you've witnessed?
I've witnessed when people manifest, they've dropped to the floor and begin to slither like a snake, for example. That would be another one. Mm. But again, all of these contortions, if you will, are just really meant to distort the human body and the human person created in the image and likeness of God.
Have you seen any skin changes? Like I had remembered watching a film where they were talking about skin eruptions manifesting or bizarre things like the letters manifest. Have you seen things manifest on a body that, couldn't happen just from life, in that moment?
Yeah, when demons manifest, usually the person's complexion changes.
How so?
If they're Caucasian, you'll see they become grayish in tone.
Okay.
Because again, it's really meant to present the human person as an animal. Mm-hmm. If you think about the story of creation in the book of Genesis, on the sixth day of creation, what did God create? He created animals and humans. What separates humans from animals? It's our capacity to live for the Sabbath, the next day, the Lord's day, to honor and glorify God. Mm. And so the demons, in rejecting God, the reason they are animalistic in nature is there is no recognition of God.
There are some that will say that your confirmation bias is at work here, that your faith essentially causes you to see what's not there and what you want to see. Your response?
I could flip that around and say that one's lack of faith prevents them from seeing what's there. So it's really a question of where does one begin? With faith, meaning believing is seeing, or the lack of faith, seeing is believing.
What do you say to people on the issue of faith who struggle with faith, who would like to be a believer, who would like to feel that sense of comfort that comes from being a believer but can't get there. What step do they take if they, for example, don't feel inclined to go to a church? Or what can they do to discover that?
I think that's the biggest challenge that we face today. I often think that the reason why there's a growing trend of unbelief or the lack of faith is that many people have a distorted image of God, that somehow we believe that God is created in our image and likeness. And if humanity is corrupt and mean and all these other ugly things, then we project that onto God. Where ultimately, if somebody believes in God, we're projecting goodness itself, goodness with a capital G, onto the human person. But we have to believe that we're worthy of that goodness. And I think sometimes people don't believe they are, and so they reflect it away or they bat it away. We're all going to struggle. I mean, nobody's faith is, 100% firm all the time. We always have trials and tribulations. Even in the history of the church, people talk about the dark night of the soul, that where people will go through some periods of doubt. I just think that's a normal part of anyone's life. Most people are familiar with Psalm 23, even though I walk through the valley of darkness. My favorite word in Psalm 23, based on one's interpretation they're using, is the word through. It lets us know that we're all going to experience darkness in our lives, but it's only temporary. We're passing through it, and even as we're passing through it, we're not alone. We're not in isolation. God is with us.
What I hear most is actually people look around at the world and they say, there's a lot of bad stuff happening. I remember after 9/11, and I was in New York at the time, a lot of people said, well, if there's a God, why did this happen? What do you say to those who feel like if there were a God, he would step in and prevent some of this damage that's happened around us?
I would say that God loves us so much that he respects free will. Everything belongs to God. God has created everything. But there's really only one gift that we can ultimately give to God, and that's our free will. And when we do that, we don't lose ourselves. We find ourselves for the very first time.
I think it's so important. I'm going to back it up and let me say it again. That's why I don't ever apologize for my faith. Like, again, if you think I'm kidding, go watch anybody. Well, no, take that back. See, I got to stop and just do that too. There's a lot of people online now, like content creators on YouTube, I'll say, that will say something about being a Christian and then they'll apologize. Sorry, I don't mean to get preachy, or you can do whatever. Like, that to me is like where, again, we stumble and fall as believers, because we should never apologize for our relationship with God, ever. And I've seen that happen so many times over the years that I have myself even have fallen victim to it. I've done it myself. I'm not perfect here. And I sat back one day and I thought, why am I doing that? Why am I apologizing for who I am and what I believe? I'm not asking you to, but I'm not apologizing for what I am. And so I always say, he gave us one homework assignment, and that was to spread the knowledge, to spread the good word. And I would think that starts with not being ashamed of him. I'm not ashamed of being a Christian, and I'm not going to apologize for it to anybody.
God thing. Free.
I'm going to hear this again.
I would say that God loves us so much that he respects free will. Everything belongs to God. God has created everything. But there's really only one gift that we can ultimately give to God, and that's our free will. And when we do that, we don't lose ourselves. We find ourselves for the very first time.
Amen.
But sometimes people struggle with that notion that, and St. John Paul II talked about this, freedom in the true sense of the word doesn't mean we get to do whatever we want. Freedom means that we act in the manner that God created us to live. So events of 9/11 and other atrocities, that's not what God intends. It's the result of people's rejection of God and ugliness, if you will. And I would say that when people look at it, all the ugliness in the world, probably what we need to change is, rather than looking outward, how do we begin to look inward into our own lives and confront whatever sinfulness is there? Because if we begin doing that, we might find that we have less to say about others, whether judgmental attitudes, always criticizing, finding fault in others. I was reading a book the other day that said, if you keep all of your sins in a bag on your back, that means they're out of sight, but you can see the sins of everybody in front of you. Maybe what we need to do is take the bag off of our backs and put it in our sight. And then we're going to realize that maybe we have less to say about other people.
I want to close with
What an amazing thing they just said. And I have been for this last year trying to remind myself of that. Look in the mirror before you are hateful to other or call somebody else out for something. You know what I mean?
some last couple of things on exorcism, and then we'll get back to the chat, see if anyone has anything additional. But has a demon ever returned in someone? For example, you address it, you expel the demon, and then X amount of time passes and those manifestations are back.
I've not had that experience where the same demon returns to the same person where it was cast out. But because I know many exorcists in the United States, we network with one another. I've discovered that demons that I have cast out have manifested in other people across the United States.
Have you seen the films? Like, have you watched The Exorcist? Have you seen these movies?
Many years ago, I watched that, but I don't watch any of that stuff anymore.
You don't? Because I would be so curious for you to watch it and just honestly analyze it. Like, oh, that's for the movies. Oh, no, I almost feel like we should have just spent this whole time, Tyler, with that movie on and just been like, does that happen? What about that? You know, because it's fascinating, and that's the only lens that the public really has into all of that stuff. You know, people used to think I was crazy.
But no, it's not. You could actually talk to this man right here. You know, talk to people that have faced challenges and been influenced by evil in real world, not in a movie.
Crazy, my husband included, when I would say, I really hope this stuff is real. I really hope this devil stuff, this demon stuff, this possession stuff, I hope it's real. And they would say, well, why? And I would say, well, because if that's real, then all the good stuff is real. Then God and the ability to cast it out is real. So I really feel like, you know, that person that looks at faith and
But you wouldn't believe how many people will believe that stuff, but will turn their back on God. Like he said earlier in this interview, that he has had to turn people down because they refuse to put God in their life. They believe they've been possessed by something evil, right? That Satan has entered their life, but then they don't want to bring God into it.
says, well, if this happens, then the good news is this also happens, and it gives you a much greater sense of hope for things like the afterlife. Have you known anyone to have a little bit of doubt, see some manifestation of what's going on here, and find their faith through the experience of either having a successful exorcism or being someone who is in the room with you or sees what happens and now says, and is overcome with a sense of faith as a result of exposure to this whole world?
Absolutely. That happens many times. A good example would be a young lady in Rome who was possessed. She was one of the 40 exorcisms that I set in on. She went on to become a nun.
Wow.
So here was somebody who was tormented by the devil and then took that experience and put it in a positive light and then dedicated her life to God. So as she was dealing with the demonic, she lived on the streets of Rome. And then she became a religious sister to dedicate her life to working with street children.
Wow. So it can change your life. It can change your life. Wow.
And that's the key thing to remember is God can take what the devil is doing and bring good out of it. And that goes back to what I said earlier. The devil may have been cast out of heaven, but he hasn't been cast out of creation. He still has a purpose to play. And the purpose that he can play is to bring people to God.
Think about
Do you
that.
get an odd intuition?
Think about that. She's just going to ramble on, but think about what he just said. That evil has a purpose to play, and that purpose is bringing people to God. So if you're walking through life and you don't, and you're not a non-believer, and you get yourself mixed up in the occult, and you open the door up for demonic possession or evil to enter your life, and you're like, oh my God, what's going on? And then you start looking for help and trying to figure out what to do. And then God can move you to say, wait a minute, I need him in my life to protect me from, that's what, like, worldly possessions. Like, I hope I'm successful here. I do. I have so many. Listen, I'm a dog lover, so I've always wanted, like, and I'm pretty good at training them. So I've always wanted to do like a rescue and like pairing vets with four-legged friends, because we got a big, vet. Our vets are ending their lives prematurely in this country at a rapid rate. We've also got an uptick in kids with depression stuff, and then look at all the animals in the world that need homes, and training them and rescuing them and pairing them up with people that will improve their lives and you give them unconditional love. That I'm not going to get into it, but that's always what I've always wanted to do, right? But like, if I get there, I get there. Yeah, God knows what's going to happen. I don't. I'm going to try. I'm going to do my best, but it's okay if it doesn't. Hope it does, but it's okay. Maybe I have another purpose.
Intuition about people in general? Like, are you someone who, I'm just, because you walk into the room, you pray, you're a conduit for, if people believe this, for the Holy Spirit. Are you someone who, in your interactions with people in the world, ever gets a sense about someone that something isn't right, or that goes beyond just a human sense, but something odd? Does that exist in your realm outside of it? Does
It does.
And what does that feel like? I'm trying to tap into the mind and like everything that goes on with a priest, with someone who is in your role. What does that feel like? Does it feel like a wave of energy change? Like, what is that?
It's pure evil. I've had that experience if I'm out and about. So even traveling here to Florida, going through airports and things, I believe that I encounter people that have an attachment to evil. And then the evil in them, something about my presence will trigger some type of reaction. Like, I've looked over and seen people just staring at me with the most hatred, evil eyes that you can imagine. And I know that it's not them as an individual, but there's some attachment to the demonic that's...
How do you know that? How do you know it's not just someone that hates organized religion? Or how do you know?
It's just a sense that I have.
Is this like, are you plain clothes when you're walking through, or you're in the traditional robes?
Usually I'm in plain clothes.
Okay, so
Oh,
it's not like they
interesting.
can recognize you.
Oh, that's
as-
interesting.
Yes.
Right.
That's interesting. That's a different level of it. I was thinking of you sitting there very visibly as a Catholic priest, and it kind of bringing up all sorts of emotions and thoughts in people. People have certain feelings about the Catholic Church, about priests in general. But if you're not in that clothing, that's really fascinating. Do you ever intervene in situations like that or confront anybody? Have you ever?
No.
And by the way, he answers this question in the interview he does the day before for this organization as well, with that I think his name's Pat. He does really good interviews. He did a really good interview with a rancher a couple years ago. I should probably cover about the beef industry. I watch a lot of stuff, guys. A lot of stuff. Okay, it's not just like this, and it's a lot, not just trials. I mean, anyway, but he answered that whenever it was brought up about the stigma with the Catholic Church and what happened with a lot of those priests and children and stuff. And he was like, listen, he's like, so what should you do about that? And he said, we got to own it. You got to take responsibility for what has gone on, and understand that people need to heal, and answer the questions, and be honest about it. I don't know. To me, he gave the 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 answer you want to hear. Is to they can't shy away from it or try to brush it under a rug. They need to face it. They need to face it head on.
No.
Because exorcisms can't be performed on anyone against their free will.
Right.
One has to desire to be free from demonic influence, because we all have free will.
Now, what I wish you would have asked, she would ask right there, is what about the child? The children that he said that there was a 4-year-old, because the parents were involved in a lot of stuff. Whenever she said you have to have your free will in order to have an exorcism, I wish you would ask him right there, what about the 4-year-old? How do you get their free will? How to agree to something they probably don't even understand?
Will. Again, we
That's
can
what I
choose
asked.
that for good, or we can choose it for evil.
Wow. Tyler, do we have any questions that
Actually,
we want to?
I have one. You said you've encountered Leviathan, who, correct me if I'm wrong, is one of the 7 princes of hell and one of the first 3 to fall. Have you ever encountered Lucifer? Have you ever? What's the highest order of demon that you've encountered? Would it be Leviathan?
No, I've encountered the devil himself during an exorcism.
And did he name himself as Lucifer?
Beelzebul,
Okay.
which is Lord of the Flies. And where does one find flies? Around death. And the devil is called the father of lies. Because what did he say to Eve? You will not die, you will become like gods. But again, his lie was, because when Adam and Eve sinned, death did enter into the world. So Beelzebul.
Is that the only time that happened? Was it one occasion that you encountered?
No, other times as well.
As well. Does that manifest in a more severe way in terms of what happens to the body of the possessed person?
Not necessarily, no.
Okay.
Because again, it's really, the demon is up against the power of God, and against the power of God, no demon can withstand, not even the devil himself. Another demon would be the demon Molech. So in the situation with Beelzebul, at one point the person was possessed by these 2 demons, Beelzebul and Molech, and Molech began to chant. And Molech is a Canaanite god that people used to sacrifice their children to. And so I commanded Molech to tell me, what are you saying? And the demon told me that it was glorifying Beelzebul because it was the highest ranking demon, and he wanted to show honor and glory to the devil.
Wow. Tyler. Chat.
Shook, man. I'm shook. And I have been for the past 3 days. Like, I have been. Robert, I gotta find it again. Robert is asking, is it possible for a demon or evil to manifest in dreams? I've had experiences where it seems to manifest in dreams. Not sure if that's a thing, if it's a warning or a threat.
It can happen because the devil can work on a person's memory and imagination. So it can be that demons could manifest in one's dreams.
Would you say that the devil lives in a specific place on earth?
No, because demons, as pure spirits, don't occupy time and space as we understand it. We would say that as pure spirit, they're neither here nor there. We say they're here or there if they're choosing to act in a location. And then the question would be, why are they acting here? Why is there a presence of evil in this location? Why is this person possessed?
When you encounter situations where it's not an individual that's possessed, but a home, for example, that someone feels has evil in it, how does it manifest in those cases? What happens to a house, for example?
People will usually hear strange things happening, noises, footprints, things that move around the house. They disappear in one area and they appear in another. It's always important to ask the question, is it truly something demonic? Or could it be the spirit of one who has died? Now, 99% of the time, what people experience would be demons. But the church does believe that God could permit, for whatever reason God may have, for the soul of one who has died to manifest in this reality.
Is that like a ghost then?
Yes.
Okay.
And usually in those cases, it's not that a person is terrified, but the things are annoying. So I know that, I had a priest tell me one time he was working with some people and they believed there was a presence in this location and the lights would go on and off and they would hear footsteps at night, but it wasn't scary.
Okay.
And I think there's something intuitive in us that when something is evil, it elicits some type of level of fear.
I don't know, man. The lights go on and off in my home. It's all evil. I'd be out of that house real fast. I wouldn't be waiting to figure out if it was just a spirit, or I'd be like, let's pack up, let's go. Okay,
It might be your husband trying to get into your
there
head.
you go. There you go. I would be the one, actually. I'm the one who puts a fake Chucky doll in the bed and hides. That's me. I have to take ownership of that. And in terms of an object, what types of objects have you seen evil manifest in?
It would be objects that are inherently evil. So they were purposely created to make a connection with the demonic world. So think of like a voodoo doll, for example.
So not, household objects or things of that nature.
They could have an attachment to evil, but again, the question would be, is it inherently evil? Was it created solely for the purpose? So think of a Ouija board. Now, some people might laugh at that and say, well, it's a harmless game. But just because we think it's harmless doesn't mean.
Now, I'm going to insert a true story here that happened to me. Okay. Now, this is just how innocent like my mother was. She had no clue. I remember this vividly. All right. Vividly. I was probably about 14 years old, 13 or 14 years old. And my mom had came home from a yard sale. Okay. We're yard sellers. I live in the South. Nothing better than a estate sale or a yard sale. Okay. I mean, if you've never been to one, I've got a beautiful oak hutch in there. I bought it in the estate sale for $25. $25. I mean, this hutch, if you want to try to buy it brand new, probably cost $700-800. I got it for $25. But anyway, so she comes home one day and I went to the yard sale, whatever, come in. Walk into my bedroom and laying on my bed is a Mattel, board games, whatever. I think it was made by Mattel, was a freaking Ouija board. And my mother had seen it at the yard sale and thought it was kind of neat and thought I might enjoy it or whatever. Thought it was like a game, a board game. Right. So I'm like, oh, this is kind of cool, whatever. I'd had friends. One of my friends I'd had since the first grade, Danielle. And I remember, I think trying to like play it with her, I think me and my sister even attempted to it one time or whatever. You put your fingers on the thing and it points to different letters or words or whatever to spell stuff out. You're supposed to be talking to spirits. And I remember one time I was sitting on my bed. I was by myself and I was like, I'll break out my Ouija board. And I started talking to whatever it was that was moving this plastic around. And I'd asked it, like I got to the question, I was asked it, are you from heaven? And it went to no. And uh, I think I'd asked a couple questions and asked how old it was or whatever. And I said, are you from heaven? And it went to no. And when I tell you, I threw that damn thing in that box and I went out, walked out to our driveway, and right next to our mailbox, we have a pecan tree. Or no, I'm sorry, a walnut tree. And I leaned that daggum thing up against that tree and I put a piece of my notebook paper taped to it and I put free and I leaned it there. And I was a kid back then. Nowadays I would just bury the damn thing, throw some salt on it, bury it. I'd never try to give that thing to somebody else. But I remember that. I remember that and the feeling of almost like fear and like dread that I felt when that thing said that. I was like, oh hell to the no. Hell no. That I, set it out to give it away. And my mom just thought it was like some kind of, little board game that you mess around with or whatever. As did I till then.
It can't be an avenue that the demonic uses. Sometimes people can bring evil on themselves directly when they do something they know they shouldn't be doing, indirectly when they think it's fun or entertaining, but it could actually be giving a demon certain rights over us.
Wow. Tyler, do we have anything out over there to close? Or?
Yes. So took another poll, interestingly enough. same as yesterday. Out of 143 votes, split 70-30. Same thing with yesterday. Yesterday we took a poll, do you believe in exorcism, demons, et cetera, 70-30. So I think I find that interesting. I think that's an interesting sample size. But a question that came in was what is the aim of a possession? And I believe Tom yesterday said, an inch from God is a win for the devil. So what is the ultimate goal with this? Is it to truly bring hell on earth? Like, what is the point of something like this?
The devil, because he wishes to mimic God in every way. And the greatest thing that God ever did for us is the incarnation. God took on human form in the person of Jesus. So the devil, who wishes to mimic God in every way, believes that he acts like God by taking on human form, by possessing a human person.
Wow. Father, this has been fascinating at all levels. I know my mom is watching at home. She's going to continue to get the holy water and bless everyone. I can tell you that. She will likely be bringing more crucifixes to adorn the house with. I'm sure my family loved this interview.
She did such a good job. And I don't want to leave y'all like this. I'm going to try and find something real fast to add to the end here for those that stuck it out. I'm sorry, I can't find a short enough version of it. I thought I could find a short enough to add, but it's just going to be too long. This is long enough. So I will continue on this path probably for the next few days. I warned everybody after the Daryl Brooks stuff, I might need a little bit of a break. I've actually been watching the thing that happened in Pike County on and off as well. Over the last few weeks, trying to catch it in between the Brooks trial. But like I found, since Halloween's coming up, I found that it was pretty interesting to try to kind of cover this stuff and take you on this journey with me about things that I find interesting, how God's impacted my life and the things that, I try to stay away from that in reality, again, you never know. I'm a little nervous. I just got monetized to like try and there's some channels that are actually like watch movies. If I knew how to edit, I probably would. I just don't want to have to freaking pause and then try to figure out to fuzz stuff out or, could you imagine? But anyway, all right. If you stuck through with me, I appreciate it. And like I said, I'll try to do a live stream if I can. I'll try to hopefully the thing just doesn't, if it gets too hot, I just cannot do it. It just is what it is. But until then, if you want to, if you'll see on my videos now, I pull this last one up. If you go over to these little three dots, again, see this little thanks button? I think that's how you can, until you can live stream, you can super chat or whatever. And I'll add below too. I have like a PayPal and a Patreon and stuff. Only if people can. Like again, this is not a demand. You know what I mean? Like the economy's in people are in a pickle right now, and I totally understand that. So again, it's appreciated, but please don't feel like I'm, uh, um, well, like, how could I force him? Y'all watching online anyway. You know the deal. All right. So have a good one. I'm going to probably start immediately working on my next one. So I will see you in the next video. Okay. Thanks for all your support, guys. Have a good one. Bye.